Well, good morning everybody, welcome to another video. So yesterday I played, the day before, I played What Lies Beneath, the newest patch for the End of Dragons storyline. There's been a bit of a shake-up obviously with the studio at the moment, the announcement of mini expansions, the fact that Living World as we knew it is gone, and so this is the first patch that's been directly integrated into the story journal, and expectations are kind of all over the place for this release. There were some people thinking, oh wow, we haven't had an End of Dragons release for a year, like a full-on new story update for a year. We haven't had a new map for a year. This is going to be amazing. And I guess we had other people thinking, well, they've only just started working on it, so don't expect much. Which, by the way, I think is the complete wrong thing to think. Just because they only recently announced to us mini X-Packs were being a thing, it doesn't mean they only just started working on this release or only just came up with a plan. And I guess there were other people who, you know, truly just sat on the fence with it, had no idea what to expect, because it's not Living World anymore. It doesn't help that there was a blog post before the release that really wasn't very well written and didn't provide much clarity. The key thing to wonder here is this what quarterly patches, once we're into the mini X-Pack stuff, is this what quarterly patches will look like? Because it sounds like we're going to get this one here, and then probably 3 months, this is my impression of it, probably 3 months away, we're going to get another update that expands the map. And that's basically exactly what they talked about with quarterlies, right? So we're going to be paying less for expansions, and then the updates that come after, which are supposed to be full-fledged parts of the expansion, are going to be this minimalistic. So that's kind of the question that's going on. I did a live playthrough of it a couple of days ago. I'm not going to shy away from this. It was a big disappointment of a patch to me. I'd put it down there with some of the weaker releases we've had. You know, that phrase, minimum viable product, definitely springs to mind. I kept using the term thin as I was playing through it. And it's not that it's terrible. They picked a good idea for the story. It's pretty enough, but I think my expectations had to be in a different place. If you just look at this release as, oh, they've added a new meta to the game with a little bit of story around it, if you really just look at it like that, if you take away all comparisons to prior Living World, then awesome. But if you look at the reality of how long it's been until we get this release, how thin this probably means the next one's going to be, I think there is definitely cause for concern. I don't think anyone who's upset about this is a raging lunatic. To me, this is really on par. It might even be less, honestly, than like one of the dry top updates or one of the silver waste updates. I actually think one of the worst releases in terms of content amount we ever had was in Season 2. Some of you guys may not have been playing the game during that time, but we had a patch where it was like the third silver waste release, the third of 4, where there was just a tiny bit of story in a very, very small expansion. It kind of feels equivalent to that to me. Back then, though, Season 2 releases were coming pretty quick, so you have to kind of view it under, you know, compared to now. It wasn't one Season 2 release every 3 months, so you kind of have to change your lens a bit. Yeah, the new map's a lot bigger, but, you know, mounts kind of facilitate that. When you look at the density of content in a map, really, size of exploration doesn't mean anything anymore. It means how many achievements are there, interactables are there, what kinds of interactables. You know, when we got Dry Top, there were new kinds of interactables. You could harvest cacti and stuff, which wasn't in the game before. You know, what kind of small innovations are there, how many NPCs are there that you can press F on, that have ambient dialogue, and on and on and on. This map really is a meta. So anyway, that's my view on it. You can check my casual playthrough of it. It took me about 4 hours stopping and chatting and really taking my time, which is how I like to play the game. We'll talk about how many hours it took some of you guys to complete in a second. And I know I don't have the most positive opinion about it here. Some people get really, like, crazy angry and, you know, insane about it when I'm not super positive about a patch. But, you know, you got to call a spade sometimes. You got to be honest. So, let's run through. I want to give some of your responses on that video. Just a random selection of things that caught my eye, things I think I can expand on, and, you know, some stuff that's got reasonable thumbs up. Let's start with this here. Which I think sums up most people fairly well. This is World Singer. He says, I don't think it's bad, but it did feel incredibly light. The story we got was fine, but it was barely there. And so to me, I just want to pause straight away. If the story is barely there, that's exactly what's not fine. I'm actually going to talk quite a lot in this video about this thing, which is, you know, people complain about the Guild Wars 2 story constantly. I think this patch is a perfect example of the biggest problem that's always been there with the Guild Wars 2 story. It's a problem that Raiders have felt, it's a problem that World vs. Wild has felt, that PvPers have felt when they haven't had updates. It's literally a question of quantity. There needs to be more story, and it will fix a lot of things going on with Guild Wars 2. So when you say the story was fine, but it was barely there, that to me just straight away means it's not fine. There has to be a certain amount of story for us to be able to get invested in the areas of the world that we go to, for us to be invested in the characters that we meet, and for them to really round themselves out and feel like fully fleshed things. Anyway, they loved the instance of the tea house, and in retrospect, yeah, I think the tea house instance was pretty good. More Rama and Goric is always good, and I think that's fair. Some of you guys were talking in the comments about this idea that they were setting up a bit of tension between Rama and Goric, a bit of friction between them, and I think you're right. I think that was quite interesting, but then it resolved, like, within the same patch. And so, overall, I don't really think it added too much to the story. If we were going to get, like, a season, air quotes, I know it's not going to be a full season type thing, but if we were going to get a few patches in a row now where we get to see them butt heads a bit, I would have been quite down for that. But it feels like ArenaNet didn't want that conflict there for long or something, and whatever entertaining would have come out of it is not there anymore. Love getting into Yao's backstory and personality more. Actually, I didn't like that about the patch at all, because End of Dragons itself seemed to suggest that the Jade Brotherhood were doing really dodgy things, and Chalmu as well, that there was something very nasty happening that caused Yao to leave, to run away, and that there was some, you know, thorn there. And I suppose that story's still possible, but I didn't get that impression in this patch at all. It kind of felt instead in this patch that Yao was still just very loyal to Chalmu, and there wasn't anything really sinister happening, and so that was very odd. If you guys watched, just before this patch came out, on my channel I did a 1 year later playthrough. They were pretty clear through some of that Echovowed content, and through like some of the stuff with June's logs at her mansion, that there was something cool going on, and now this patch seemed to have robbed it. So yeah, it's cool to see more of these characters, but then, I don't know, it feels like we lost something there. Didn't realise that Chalmu is a legitimate competitor to Junlei Jade and June. I thought he was just a criminal selling bootleg products. I'm down for exploring demons. The final fight was neat, and I got a little choked up with Air's appearance. I'm so excited to explore the commander's PTSD. Overall, it was awesome to return to DR and New Kaineng at the start of the patch. I hope they keep using old maps for new instances like that, because we have so many beautiful pre-existing locations. So just a couple of thoughts before we get into the second half of your comment here. Yeah, I think the Oni and the big choices that they made with the Mists, as I mentioned in that live video, they're all really good decisions. They've made excellent big ticket decisions, I think, here. They were just implemented very minimally because it is such a thin patch, but overall the big ideas are good. I can't say I got choked up at all about Air or any of those reappearances. It's just happened too many times already. You know, I mentioned the end of Heart of Thorns in the live video. With Air particularly, I mean, Christ, we even went back to Air. We looped back to her when she came out of the Mists in Season 4, right? So, I don't know, I think that ship has sailed to a certain degree. As for the commander's PTSD, this is a weird one. It's tricky. I really like the idea of exploring the PTSD of the commander. I personally really like it when the commander talks, makes observations, has thoughts and feelings. They don't have to match my own. I just like seeing them be an entity in the world, because the way I play the game is I'm not role-playing as my characters, Liz or whoever. I'm just sort of a witness to the event, so I don't mind them having their own concepts. The thing is, a lot of other people I am aware out there only want to roleplay, and so then it gets tricky, because if the commander is experiencing PTSD and you don't feel that yourself, and you know the commander is your self-insert, then I think you're just going to hate it. And also, you know, I saw a bit of discussion about this as well. This always comes up with stuff like this. The commander is kind of being written as one character now, but it really stings when you realize that if you're playing one of the more exaggerated, like, racial archetypes. So if I'm a Char, if I'm a Blood Legion badass Char, the PTSD idea might not fit so well. That might not be your idea for what the character's supposed to be. Not everyone plays the game in the same way, and I think over the years many of us have been conditioned to stop thinking about the race of our character. But some people still do, and you know, I haven't screenshotted any of them here, but I've read multiple complaints and comments about, like, well, this doesn't fit my character. And this comes up every single time they try to do something with the commander. That paired with the fact that it's so expensive to voice the commander. You know, every one voice they do for the commander is 30 voice-acted lines, because it's 5 races, 2 genders, that's 10, and then 3 languages, English, German, and French. So that genuinely is 30 lines for every single thing they want the commander to say. So doing deeper stories with the commander, I mean, it sounds nice. I don't really buy into it too much. And actually, I'm not sure that that's what ArenaNet are doing here either. I'm kind of a big fan, guys, of this idea that we're going into some Lissa stuff, that they'll explain some of those odd mysteries around Path of Fire. And with Season 3, how did Balthazar get Lyssa's mirror? Why didn't he curse her name? Some of the ways that she's referred to. So what they might do is tie this Oni thing with the mists, with Lyssa or something. And I know that this kind of idea has come up again and again and again over the years, but I think that's why we're getting a bit of emotion out of the Commander, and we're showing that they're like extra susceptible to emotions and stuff at the moment. That might be what they're doing. Another comment I saw in the Spud Discord that I think is really cool is the idea that they could tie the PTSD story to a moment where Aurene is dead. I know Aurene isn't dead. She's conspicuously missing from this release. This is another good example here. We need more story, because big stuff like, why isn't Aurene there? Why isn't Aurene helping us on any level? Just feels a bit weird, you know. There should have been a scene in Arborstone where we get to at least hear what she's doing, or see that she's missing off doing her own thing or something. But, you know, if they go to a story where Aurene is gone, if Aurene had died at the end of Dragons, for example, going into a PTSD arc would be pretty cool. It would be pretty well timed. And if it happens in the future, maybe it would be pretty well timed as well there. So anyway, that's what I think about some of that stuff. As for going to previous areas, I couldn't agree more. I don't compliment this patch with that, though. I think it's a bit rich to say, oh, this patch was great. It took us back to New Kaineng. It didn't do anything more special than countless other Living World releases have done. I mean, this is the status quo. Nearly all Living World releases start or have an instance somewhere in a pre-existing map, particularly if that's, you know, our connection into the new area of the world. So I don't know whether I'd go as far as complimenting this release for that. It just did what the others have done. I think we should have got a lot more of that. It's talking about Arborstone. You know, I'm calling this a thin release, just to be very clear. I think I would have been very accepting and very happy with this release if we had an Arborstone scene. I'm not talking about a whole instance where we fight enemies, where we use special action keys, where we play mini games and all that kind of stuff. You know, ArenaNet don't have to be insecure about just dumping story on us. I would like to have gone to Arborstone to talk a little bit about Aurene, particularly in the context of this update. You know, maybe in the middle of the Jade Sea stuff, right before we do the meta or the final instance, we at least consult with her or something. I think we should have gone to Arborstone, especially, is a big place, and we could have spoken to some of these other little used characters like Ayumi. And again, they don't have to be voiced. I think this is meaningful story, even if this is just press F and read text dialogue. At least you get to explore more of Ayumi. At least you get to explore more of Aurene now that she's become like the Mega Dragon. I think we should have had Arborstone. We should have had a moment in the throne room with Inn. We should have had a moment at the Dead End Bar in Divinity's Reach. And, you know, maybe even another little something in New Kaineng where they talked a bit about the Jade Crisis, you know, and maybe we go to the jails and see Minister Lee or something. What I'm proposing here is a lot of story, and it's not voice-acted story, and it's not pumped up with loads of content. It is just warping around talking to people, but it reuses old areas, and it gives us that depth that the game is missing. The game is desperately missing depth at the moment. And for people who say, well, I don't like it when it's not voice acted, you know, a lot of those people, they're not that into the story anyway, and there's actually something really nice about the less voice acted stuff. It's that you can skip through it. You know, those kinds of players just click, 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 and it's fine, you know. I think players of that mindset are probably happier quickly waypointing around a few places, and they can spam through and essentially skip the story, rather than stand there listening to characters prattling on about stuff they really don't care about at all, you know. And if that stuff had been in this patch, you know, I'm not proposing major gameplay stuff. I think it wouldn't have felt thin at all, and I think the story as it currently is standing would have felt much, much deeper and more interesting to be about, because right now it really is, you can sum this patch up in like 3 sentences. We go beneath the Jade Sea, the Jade Brotherhood are there struggling, and an Oni attacks us. We get emotional. Alright, there you go, 4 sentences. Maybe you can turn one of those into a subordinate clause. That's it. And I wouldn't have minded if the content of the patch is just a meta so much, if the story itself, which appears to be the focus, got a little bit more depth. Anyway, let's return to World Singer's comment here. The back half. So they say, I don't think it's too bad, but it did feel light. I hope they keep using old instances, compliment some things. And then they say, when all is said and done, though, I thought that's it. I just expected more, a whole year after End of Dragons. It didn't feel like as long as a Living World episode. I'm fine with less maps, but I thought the trade-off would be longer, richer story segments. Or hoped, rather. That less dev time on maps meant we could go a bit slower on the story instances, sections, and explore things fully, especially if they incorporate old locations. I wouldn't say my hype is a letdown, but it's not satisfied either. I'm just kind of lukewarm about it. And then they say, I haven't been able to experience the full meta yet, so maybe that will change things. I'm eager to see what's next. I just wish this patch felt meatier. I'm assuming you did beat the meta. I mean, that's quite funny, to be honest, that you can come and review and talk about how it was a bit of a letdown, but you haven't seen it all yet. But I assume what you mean is maybe some of the branches of the meta, and that's kind of a position I'm still in, by the way. I haven't seen necessarily every event. I am still aware that there's all those little lore journals around that seem to be missing from the map, or I can't get my hands on. So maybe it will change in the future, but yeah. So there you go, a bit of a middle of the road response there that I assume usually this is the way of things a lot of people are feeling. I already did a big rant about the PTSD thing. Sorry, this is a bit unstructured, everyone. Here, Igor of Karim. I would kind of love a Commander PTSD arc, in all honesty. Canucksign as demons, playing on fear and unresolved anxieties to warp people's minds, would be a fantastic framing for exploring, and would function as a segue into more myth stories. At least the female human commanders VA also did an absolutely stellar job this patch in selling the vulnerability and disorientation of demons messing with your head. And honestly, the commander really bland as a character, even comes off as stupid and callous sometimes. Really? Stupid and callous? I'd happily sacrifice some of the blank slate bland self-insertiness of the character if it meant they could do something more substantial and emotional with our guy. And yeah, again, I kind of already did this rant. I think these are all nice ideas, guys, but I'm pretty much disagreeing with it. I think it's a bad idea because it's expensive to voice the commander, because I don't like moments where the game reminds me that the commander is written all as one character instead of each of the 5 races, or in the future if they even added more races and stuff, this would continue to be a problem. I think they don't have to make the commander a complete blank slate. Some of my favourite moments in the game are when the commander speaks, like when we're fighting Balthazar and they cry that they're still standing. Or, you know, I remember even at the start of Heart of Thorns, that novelty of the first time my commander spoke in the open world map when I picked up, like, an item. Like, these are really cool moments. I would never want to get rid of them completely. I just don't think that the commander is something to tell big stories with. I think they should use the other characters for that, if I'm perfectly honest. A fun little observation. I mean, this isn't... I don't want everything I talk about to be, like, grim reviewing, right? Here's a fun little observation. Banjo says, the mushroom area of the new map reminds me of the area in Jahai labelled question mark, question mark, question mark. Full of hallucinations? Perhaps there was void-related stuff in Jahai after the chaos. I don't... This is a cool thought, okay? And, yeah, I forget about the question mark, question mark, question mark area probably a little too much. You know, I did that recent video where I said all the cool places the story could go. I never mentioned the question mark, question mark, question mark area. For those of you who have forgotten or don't know, this is a tiny pocket of reality that you could visit that did not seem to be on Tyria at all, and we just don't know where it was or what it's all about. And again, yeah, this hallucination mushroom thing, it's funny because in the new map we have hallucinations and we have mushrooms. I don't know, though, whether that's just, you know, a natural pairing and whether the devs are actually thinking about this. But, wow, yeah, that didn't even cross my mind, and I sort of love it. Here, we got a slightly tangential message here. This was actually on Discord from Mr. Modius, who was getting this message that kind of inspired me to do a Q&A, because we haven't done one for a while. They say, WP, I don't know... I was, like, in the middle of typing a response out in Discord, and I thought, you know what, this should be in a video. I don't know if this has been asked of you, but for you personally, as someone who has covered the game for so long, is there anything that ArenaNet could do story-wise with an expansion to hype you up to the Heart of Thorns reveal levels again? I want to say, by the way, my hype levels for POF were pretty fucking high as well. It was just difficult to talk about it because so much of that was based on leaks, you know. Anyway, like basing it in a specific location or dealing with some lore bombs that you think would get you unbelievably excited again, or like a mature and settled marriage, do you think that ship has long since sailed? I was thinking about it for me earlier. That's a nice metaphor there, a nice comparison, the idea of it being like a settled marriage. I think it is like a settled marriage for me in a lot of ways. And I'll say, this is not even a difficult question for me to answer. I know 100% there is absolutely no story. There is no region of the world, there is no plot idea that all on its own would get me absolutely thrilled and pumped. So I did a video saying all the places, all the plots that I think the game can logically go. They're all exciting to me. I know that they're all brilliant concepts that I'd enjoy, and specifically like as a lore fan and as someone who enjoyed the lore in Guild Wars 1, I think these would be dynamite ideas. Probably the one at the very top of the list is the Scepter of Ore, just because of its emphasis in Guild Wars 1 and how it hasn't been paid off even to this day. That is like the ultimate mystery. You know, it was set up as significant and influential in prophecies, right? The very beginning. So I think the Scepter of Ore is like the ultimate. But, you know, if they came out and they announced, oh, we're doing the Scepter of Ore, it's not like I'd be giddy spinning around in excitement, feeling my heart go or something, you know. It is that settled marriage thing where it's like, well, we'll see how they do it. But I'll tell you, and maybe this is somewhat interesting, I do think I can get back to that place for hype. I do think I can get that giddy, oh my god, well, this is going to be crazy kind of hype space. But funnily enough, it's not actually about story material. You know, you can give me any subject, any place of the world, and it's all about execution. They can do it well, or they can do it poorly. With their current levels of execution, with the current way that they quite shallowly gloss over areas of the world, gloss over the characters they have, with the current, oh, you can beat an expansion in about 4 or 5 hours, you can beat a living world patch in about 2 hours, this most recent one even as low as 1, we'll get a comment on in a second. With the current pace that we go through the game, with how minimal the dialogue is and all that kind of stuff, with how much of the story that they write is actually just random flavor with side dynamic events that you'll miss, and, you know, with the practices and procedures that the game currently executes, I don't think it really matters what story they tell me. There are good ideas, there are bad ideas. I can generally guess how they'll be implemented. I can guess how they'll iterate on personal story steps. I can guess how they'll iterate on meta events. And they don't do big major shakeups with the game anymore, right? That's just the truth. When we look back at Heart of Thorns, and to a lesser extent POF, but when you look at Heart of Thorns, why was that so, oh my god, this is incredible, what can they do? It's because there was no precedent. There was no real concept of how they might iterate on things. Heart of Thorns, its initial announcement, might have felt like a Guild Wars 1 campaign. It might have been really, really large scope and like tons of stuff to go through, like a very long, feeling adventure. You know, I remember when they got on stage and talked about the Druid, right? We're all familiar with Elite Specs now, but I remember really thinking of like, oh wow, I can go to the jungle and role play as the Druids and I'll meet the Druids and stuff. And when they were talking about early mastery stuff, we didn't really get how that system would play out, and it was a totally new system. When they talked about outposts, and when they talked about adventures, and when they talked about stronghold, and when they talk about guild halls, these are all massive new ideas with no idea how they would fill the game out, and that's where I think the excitement came from. If ArenaNet came and announced an expansion and said it was the Scepter of War, great. But if they came and announced an expansion and said, we're really shaking up the way we do the personal story, there's going to be a lot more story now, you know, there will be compromises here or there or whatever, but we've got these new ideas, we're going to spend a lot longer in each map before we move on. You know, if they were going to add a formal questing system instead of weird half quests through achievement UI, you know, if there were big shake-ups still happening with the game, immediately I'd be straight back into that. I'd be like, wow, what is this? This is going to be incredible. And again, like, I know a lot of people weren't excited about fishing with End of Dragons, but that is one of those little places for me where I kind of got back to that, because I was like, wow, this is going to be something totally new. Let's see what it is. When you think about the skiff, when you think about the turtle, they were ideas, but again, having played with mounts already, you could kind of feel where they came from. So yes, I could get back to that incredible, excited level. But is Guild Wars a product that will continue doing stuff like that when it feels like ArenaNet are trying to push for the next thing? You know, they're probably working on something in the background that's not, you know, a mini expansion or a living world. There's probably something else going on. I don't know. It feels to me like they haven't been in that place since HOT. And that was obviously a long time ago now. Alright, another take from the release, and it is one of the more negative ones, but I think that they've illustrated something quite well about marketing and expectations, which I do think this patch is all about. Again, like, if everyone went into this just thinking of it, oh, it's a meta that they're adding, then when you realise there's some story on top and there's some achievements on top and stuff, that feels like, oh, that's nice, that's extra. When you think it's going to be a full-fledged Living World release that's going to be a bit bigger than normal because it's setting up mini X-Packs and because you haven't had a full-fledged Living release for a year, you feel bad about the patch. So here's what Lars says. For me, the biggest disappointment wasn't even my own meh experience. It's that usually with patches I can convince my world versus world and more casual friends who don't play often to get into the game thanks to the story and cutscenes. With this patch, with 0 cutscenes, it's interesting you notice there's 0 cutscenes. See, to me, this minimum viable product thing, I think there are a ton of places that ArenaNet can cut effort out of Living World patches, and rightly so. And I think that this map actually demonstrates a lot of them, and rightly so. And I'm actually very happy with a lot of the cuts that they made. One of them being cutscenes. Yeah, I don't think that we need massive, amazing, like, really difficult to implement. Do you remember when they talked about how it took them like 6 to 9 months to make that one Joko cutscene for Season 4? You know, I think that's exactly the kind of thing that they should say, no, fuck it, this is not worth the effort. You could tell a good story without having cutscenes and mocap and stuff, really. You could save that just for the big moments, you know, starting, ending, expansion, stuff like that. So yeah, I was fine with that, but it's interesting. Other people obviously are not, and I'm happy to platform that. You can't even promote it to your friends. Most of my World vs. World guilds are skipping it, even though it adds a reward track. That's funny to me, actually. Reward tracks as well are one of those things I'd expect a very thin release to not add. Did this patch really add a reward track? That to me is like an extra. It's a good shout, though. I like reward tracks. These same people praised End of Dragons and became PvEers for months because of the quality of the expansion, but none of them are interested in the new patch because of the lack of promotion and hype from players. The Icebrood Saga prologue feels like an expansion compared to this patch. I wouldn't say it feels like an expansion, but yeah, it is definitely true, I think, that Grothmar felt much meatier. I love your optimism that they're doing a trade-off for something better, like the X-Pack or Guild Wars 3, but I'm not as optimistic. If that's the case, they're making a huge marketing error by ruining their game's reputation for quality updates. Some people online have said they warned us. If you expected different, then you weren't paying attention. I work in marketing. You can't blame the average consumer for feeling your product has gone down in quality. As a company, you set expectations and define the standards. If they wanted to prep the audience for what's to come, they needed videos, visuals, promises ahead of time, not a singular lower your expectations post. ArenaNet knows this. They've done amazing in the marketing in the past. The fact they didn't do any of these things reads to me like things are dying and they don't know how to sell it. I'm usually more optimistic about Guild Wars 2, but their below bottom level PR and marketing combined with the quality feels like even they can't find a way to sell what they're offering. Okay, I get a lot of mixed messages here. I don't think everything that this person is saying is reasonable. I don't think the game is dying. I don't think that, you know, we're at the bottom of the barrel or anything like that. But this idea that they need to define expectations properly is absolutely true. I don't know what you're talking about with a post where they warned us. What are you talking about they warned us? No, nobody warned anyone of anything. And that's part of the problem. I think that, yeah, the whole thing here could have been, all right, fine, they cut a trailer out from a week before, and content creators are going to whine about that. But average players, maybe that's okay. Maybe what we lose in one place, we gain another. Fine, they've cut a trailer, but surely there could have been a post expressing the scope of this release. You know, and that's the kind of thing, people often talk about communication, right? And they say, oh, ArenaNet need to communicate more, they don't communicate enough, and so on. I look at most people in that conversation, in that arena, as what they really are is they just want news, and they just want to hear as much as they can ahead of time, because they're obsessed fans with the game, and they just want more. And that's fine, but I don't think it's realistically something that ever needs to happen. When I talk about communication from the studio and that I want more communication, what I'm always looking for is honesty. I'm looking for realistic expectations to be set. There will have been people at the studio who knew this was a much thinner patch than normal patches, and I think when I think we need good communication from ArenaNet, I think what that means is a week before or however long before, when they announce a thing, they should have had in that original blog post, yeah, there's going to be a lighter patch coming. This next patch is going to be smaller, thinner, whatever they want to use, you know, and obviously they're going to use a bit of PR speak there because they don't want to stir up a massive controversy. But there should have been something in the way of saying to people, look, this is not going to be like a full-fledged big living world patch. You know, set expectations low, and people will be surprised when you exceed them quite often. You know, I think that that's a good rule, and that's a thing they should be comfortable to do. But they just seem scared of ever offering real candor. I think that blog post, I already thought that the recent blog post was poorly written before this patch. Now I think it's exceptionally badly written, because it really should have just said, you know, this is the scope the patch is going to be. It's a bit thinner than normal, so please prepare for that. And for what it's worth, I think right now we're in the same situation. There needs to be that in a nice, prominent, official platform, not some random, casual, unprofessional supposition from a dev in a Reddit thread or a Twitch stream. There should be an actual comment saying, hey, by the way, the next patch is going to be light as well. You know, then once the expectations are in check, I think patches like this will go down a lot better. Next, we have Anthony Marangeli. I love that second name. WP, what do you think of the petrified mouths eating the ley lines? They're also in the Crystal Desert and a very old 2012 concept art. Yeah, so I played the patch again after the video I did. And on that time, yeah, we were all in Discord saying, oh my god, what? These worms, these things. And I think that is actually something big about the patch that I missed and is genuinely really exciting. If you guys didn't catch it, in the final room, the room where the meta currently ends, where the story ends, where we see the Oni, there's the 3 platforms. Obviously, we see the ley lines in there, but they're actually getting funneled into the mouths of some, like, giant petrified worm things. And I just want to say, this is buried in this video, okay? But if you're going to take anything away from this video, like, from lore speculation, I really think it's very much on purpose. These things look just like those giant, like, tendril things that were popping out in Nightfall. So when you go back to, I'm talking about Guild Wars 1 Nightfall here right now. When you look at like the ruins of Mora and how the world has been corrupted and tormented in the desolation, where Abaddon was defeated, where the space between Tyria and the Realm of Torment is very close, where Varashosa broke that hole in between the dimensions. You can see there's all these big worms and things everywhere. As Nightfall is coming, you know, you get the Torment claws bursting out of the ground. And that was like a very distinct visual associated with this corrupted demonic area of the Mists. A very distinct idea. And they're still there in Guild Wars 2 as well. When you go to the Guild Wars 2 Desolation, and say when you do the meta, you go to the Heart of Torment, you will still see these big worm things ripping at these arched, like, tendrils of what looked like creatures arcing around. And I think ArenaNet know about those. I think it's deliberate. We're still dealing with Void right now, right? We're dealing with a slightly different flavor of Void. Now, when you guys go to Dragon's End, what does it say as we are waiting for the timer to go down? It says minutes to Nightfall. They call it Nightfall. They draw a direct comparison between the Void taking over the world in Guild Wars 2 at the end of the Elder Dragons arc back to the event of Nightfall in Guild Wars 1, which again is like this apocalyptic scenario, but that is where the Realm of Torment is sort of merging into Tyria, and they called it Nightfall. But so now, in this patch, we get another flavor of Void threatening the world. You could still, in theory, call it like a Nightfall-esque thing, and these worm things are back. So I think it is deliberate. I think that they're trying to suggest that the event of Nightfall in Guild Wars 1 with Abaddon was a somewhat similar situation to the whole dragon issue. And that fits perfectly because Abaddon was thrown away for his opinions about magic. And if we're about to go to the Mist, we're about to deal with the gods, I think they'll loop all of that in. They might not just explain all this Lyssa stuff and Balthazar stuff. They might even talk a little bit more about Abaddon's banishment and go deeper into that. I think that they've thought that stuff through. And yeah, those tendrils, really something to look at. The fact that they're eating the ley magic. The other side of it as well is it looks a bit like a kraken, doesn't it? It looks a bit like a giant squid-like octopus is buried in the rocks or something, and the tendrils have burst out. And I don't think that's a coincidence either. They might even hook all of this into like the monster that's in the depths, the whole Kraken story, the Hydra that attacks Lion's Arch, all of that is all like the same visuals, right? Also, if you think about it, when they expand this map and the meta continues, we're going to be burrowing into that rock right where it looks like these tendrils come from. So I think that's all really big stuff. I'm very guilty. You know, not all content is perfect, obviously, but I feel bad that I didn't see that and we didn't talk about that at all in that original video. I mean, it was a live first impression off the cuff thing, but yeah, I think that's a big deal, and I would like to think there's good discussion about it online. So yeah, well spotted, good comment. Next, we got Sock Knife, who says, I'm glad I skipped the meta while I was progressing the story. Seeing the Oni for the first time in the story instance was nice. Yeah, oh man, I wish I had your experience. So the story was ruined a little bit for me, I think. The Oni are something I've always been really, really keen on seeing in Guild Wars, in End of Dragons, in Cantha. I always imagine a big moment where one bursts out of nowhere, assassinates someone or something. You know, it's a big model. I kind of wanted them to give the Oni the Oak treatment, where, you know, they look kind of crappy and small and weird in the first game, and then they're huge and amazing and exciting in the second game. And, you know, I wanted a good camera angle on them. I wanted them to have big, distinct, obvious animations. And then I play the patch, and I randomly die to what I assume are random mobs. I don't think they actually said Oni in the nameplate, did they, or something? And it was only later I got told I'd been killed by Oni. So my experience of meeting the Oni was just the worst possible thing. Random things in the open world that I don't even notice that I'm fighting, surrounded by animations from other players. And yeah, if I had but I can acknowledge that that was just my unfortunate situation with it. If I had just played through the story straight away, the first Oni I would have seen would have been in that final chamber. And it's unfortunate that they layered the meta event with the story the way they did, because I think most people, I don't know, am I wrong here? I feel like most people are going to beat the meta in the middle of the story, and they might miss out on that experience too. So yeah, a little bit unfortunate. There's this old marriage thing as well that we were talking about a second ago. You know, when I look at the Oni in Guild Wars 2, it's very clear, like, that's a skeleton that's been reused from other enemies. You know, you look at an Oni, and it's got, like, that same posture, that same slight hunchback as, like, trolls or ice brew trolls and stuff, you know, that you've seen a lot before, and that kind of takes a bit of it away. You know, we were talking about adding new cutscenes and stuff, what is a minimum viable product? And I guess this would have been a decision that they made. Do the Oni deserve a whole new, really grand, amazing model or what? You know, when I look at some of my favourite patches, some of my favourite enemies, when you look at, say, Bastion the Penitent, which is one of my all-time greatest up there for 1,000 reasons I'd love to go into again. But, you know, you look at Samurog, right? That's like totally alien and new. You look at Deimos, you look at a lot of that stuff. In fact, those raiding releases were so unbelievably high quality, it's unreal to look at. Now, this is a main story patch. We have an Oni at the end. And it is a new model, and it's got some new stuff. You know, it's got the tendrily things under its neck, but we just never got that good, big first look at it. It wasn't like a Samurog moment, was it? Next, we have Poskmist, who says, I just need to comment on the 3-hour time for completion that you arrived at. Yeah, I think my video was like 4 hours, but the first was a lot of dossing around, and the last was, and the start was a lot of dossing around, and the end was a lot of dossing around. So yeah, I probably took about 3 hours. I usually take a lot longer to beat the patches than most people, especially if I'm like streaming them live. But okay, so I arrived at 3 hours. Like some of the live chat said, the story is actually a bit over an hour, even if you take your time. The meta is 35 minutes, 40 minutes max. The length does not feel like it's up to a par for a regular living story for me. Looking at the achievements, there's precious little to do, so no real big semi-long-term goals. The weapons are on the TP, I think. That's if you don't count the legendary weapon variant, of course. Which, thankfully, by the way, I think a lot of people are getting and does add some meat to the patch. I complimented Season 3 for adding new legendaries. I'll compliment this patch for adding new legendaries. I know there are only variants, and we had that discussion before End of Dragons came out, but still. Also, since the map's going to be expanded, the next map will also necessarily be a meta map that resets when the meta's done. So that means we won't have a regular map with hearts, jumping puzzles, and leisurely exploration until the next mini-expansion. Okay, this edit is crazy to me. Yes, that's a revelation. See, I wanted to explore the Jade Sea in a leisurely, chill, relaxed way. I didn't really get to very well with Dragon's End. And now I look at the new map and I don't get to either. There's that place at like the outside, which is very small. The rest of it's underground and it's all adrenaline, go, 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 follow NPCs, go, 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 go. I really don't like meta maps for like exploration and like exploring the setting. Do you guys remember what I said like 2 weeks ago where I was saying all the things I wanted from this map? Lots of water, lots of opportunity for the skiff and stuff. And, you know, and casual, relaxed exploration, visiting those quiet temples with the flower petals fluttering around, just like Dragon's End has, but without the pressure of a meta. Well, none of that happened. This is a meta map, and yeah, it's going to be the same again. You're right. So we're just not going to get that. We're just straight up not going to get that. There might be space for something else, but it's not going to be the Jade Sea after we fully expanded. But it's not going to be the Jade Sea, isn't it? It's going to be Echovald, or it's going to be Raisu, or it's going to be something. I mean, who knows? I mean, there was so little story here. There was nothing about the Celestial Blessing and all those other ideas. I really feel like they might do meta maps on that again. So, yeah, a bit rough. I guess what the devs have seen is that meta maps are very good for, like, retention and keeping people playing and stuff. So they narrowed in on it. But it does mean that if this is what all the quality patches are going to look like, then it's going to be rough. And by the way, going back to this idea of them openly acknowledging this is a shorter patch, a thinner patch, I think the issue is that if they want this to be like what the quarterly patches are like, they're kind of doing two things at once. On the one hand, they're telling us, okay, you buy the mini X-Pack, and the subsequent quarterlies are a part of the X-Pack. Don't worry. They're just as good as the X-Pack. They're going to roll out, you know, just a little bit later. They can't tell us that and then also tell us that the quarterlies are going to be smaller than normal, you know, than Living World was, because they're asking us to value that as well as an X-Pack, you know. So I think that's probably why they avoided that. On the one hand, by the way, I think that the fact that this meta is going to expand kind of forgives this patch a bit. Like, I see that with a lot of people. They'll say, oh, don't complain, it's going to get expanded. And I think that's kind of fair from a certain perspective, if you're happy to wait another 3 months for that to come, you know, a year and a half, going back to the end of Dragons for it to be there. And again, it is that thing, like, Drizzlewood probably went too much with the meta in the first half, because it's so big now. If I think about the end of this current patch, that feels like a mid-meta boss, doesn't it? It feels like the midpoint. And so, once that's fully expanded, I think the map will feel really good. And yeah, your phrase, this doesn't feel like regular Living World, it's because it's not. It's like earlier Living World. It's like some of the Season 1 patches. It's like some of the Season 2 patches. What you might want to think of, guys, is they probably went too hard, too heavy with Season 3 and 4. And they might be trying to rein it in, but selling it as part of the next pack? I don't know, man. I don't know. Well, we need to know if this is what these are going to look like. Is this a bog standard quarterly or not? Alright, so I've got one final question here. I've saved it for last. It may end up getting cut out of the video because it's kind of on a topic that I really don't like talking about online. But it's basically about the quality of the storytelling with a really weird, crazy, conspiratorial idea that I just sort of wanted to platform. Maybe we can get a bit of discussion about it. This is on the topic of diversity and representation and you know, all those things that we see at ArenaNet have been doing more and more and more of over the years. It's a conversation I may cut out of this video because I tend to not encourage, because I think the general public is stupid. I think people on the internet, generally speaking, don't know what they're talking about. I don't think internet forms of communication are good enough for, like, real serious topics. And at the end of the day, usually what I'm trying to do is review and critique and talk about game. I'm not trying to change the world here or anything, and I usually feel like if I respond and kind of push a conversation, it's just going to keep going and going and going. But yeah, so as is often happening, there's like a whirlwind of hate and discussion about whether we should correctly gender fictional video game characters, blah, 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 blah. Stuff that I think is very fashionable to talk about and people are really, really interested in the moment. But here at the bottom is this message from OK Buddy Cormier, who, for what it's worth, if you go to their YouTube channel, they have like this shitpost video where they essentially express how much they hate the End of Dragons storytelling. You know, how it's too political, it's too woke, it's cantophonia, and, you know, all this kind of stuff. The comments are fascinating on the video as well. People, a lot of them seem like very old Guild Wars 1 fans as well, all talking about when they think that the franchise jumped the shark. Was it when Cormier ascended to godhood? Was it when the clothes in the you know, schoolgirl outfit clothes in the gem store got cancelled? Was that the canary in the coal mine? And so on and so on and so on. So, anyway, here they left a comment in a discussion thread that was under my last video, which started talking about, you know, misgendering Yao, and then turned into a big discussion about whether the story is bad, because the devs care more about that stuff than other things. Anyway, here's what they say. Look, there are two types of writers. Ones that want to tell an engaging story and win over the players, and ones who will use pandering to appeal to critics and award shows. ArenaNet writers, in their opinion, are the latter, and their pandering comes with all sorts of restrictions and unwritten rules that prevent them from ever telling a compelling story. This is why representation has become a red flag, not because the concept itself is bad. And no need to talk about forced diversity in quotes. In January, Tom Abernathy, one of the End of Dragons writers, who by the way spent 4 years at ArenaNet and by his own admission didn't read the lore on the wiki because he didn't care, made a tweet questioning why End of Dragons wasn't nominated for a GLAD award despite ArenaNet writers making a behind-the-scenes deal with them 3 years ago. Do you know why Yao is agender? Why dead Theo Ashford suddenly had a husband? Why Kaz and Jory were on the box art? Actually, it's not really box art, is it? It's key art, right? To win this award, not on merit, but on box ticking and shady deals made with award shows. Why tell a good story when you can just do some good old pandering and get a free award, which you can then put on your resume, quit your current job and leverage it into a new position? That's how grifters operate. Man, that thing about people doing this to just get new jobs really makes my skin crawl. If you've spent any time on like ArenaNet Glassdoor and you've looked at all these people who just do use the studio as a stepping stone to the next career, it's really a very ugly, scary thought. And furthermore, if you watch any dev streams with the writers, you'd know they shy away from themes like Kurzix and Lux and conflict because they want everyone to get along, which is nice and all, but it makes incredibly boring and bland. So he's 100% right about certain themes being completely off the table because of the people that they hire. Of course, it is possible to tell a good and engaging story that's also diverse and inclusive, but that's effort. Pandering is the shortcut. So this is just a crazy comment, and by no means by me platforming it here do I want to say that this is all true. I've never heard of the GLAD Award. I've never heard of a shady backroom deal that happened 3 years ago, and I would love to know where this quote is from. I personally never heard Tom Abernathy say that he never read the wiki at all, even though he was one of the big End of Dragons writers. Though supposedly there's like a long interview where that might appear. I don't know. I asked people in the spot about that before. What I really wanted to talk about here is just funny because I don't comment on this much at all. People are obsessed with this topic, whether Guild Wars 2's writing has got worse because of this forced diversity and stuff. And just to be clear, I think what my take on this is that it's really not got anything to do with ArenaNet wanting to make a statement about fascism, or ArenaNet wanting to provide representation, or for minority audiences, whether they want to present a ton of really strong female characters, and you may feel that they made all the men buffoons and idiots and so on. I think all of that may be true, that ArenaNet do want to change the world, they want to actually have their say, they want to put their thoughts and feelings. I mean, most media will do that, okay? Surprise, surprise. That's how the world's operated for years. I think Star Trek's a really funny show that comes up often with this, because people in the modern era will say, well, look at this show, this did all this amazing progressive political content and it wasn't ham-fisted at all. But what they don't realize is it actually was. It's just the world has moved on so much now. A lot of what Star Trek was talking about seems tame, you know, and that's because we have continued along a thread, and it's kind of hard to actually compare End of Dragons to, say, Star Trek or whatever. But I think the thing that I really want to talk about here is, I don't think that the storytelling has gotten thin or has got weak or is bad because ArenaNet also have these ambitions. I think it's thin and it's weak because there is not enough content, because of the shoddy practices and procedures like I was mentioning earlier in the video. I look at a lot of people who are really struggling and pissed off with the story because they say, oh, I'm not enjoying this. I'm not really having fun. I'm not really experiencing great, interesting characters. But look, they've spent the time to talk about how Theo Ashford was gay now. Or they've took the time to talk about how Yao is agender. So therefore, that must be the problem. And people like get riled up at that. A certain type of person gets riled up at that because they think that ArenaNet's priority is on those things rather than just telling a good story. And I can see how people get led astray in that way, but I think, guys, the truth is just the current structure of the story, the kind of playtime we get, the analysis we get of the setting, is too minimal to give you rich, interesting characters. Like, let's look at Yao, for example. They have this idea that they want, I don't know whether it's because they want to tick a box to win an award to then jump off to another career, right? But they have this idea that they want Yao in the game. And they say, well, yeah, that's fine. No one's going to argue against that. No one's anti-diversity. So they say, well, we'll do it. But then where do they go from there? Well, they have a budget for the expansion. They have a set number of lines. Yao does not particularly fit into many of the story steps. So what does Yao get? Yao gets a few moments in one of the personal story missions. I'm talking about Launch Ender Dragons here. And Yao gets a meta event. So that's literally going to be like 20 to 30 lines for this character. In the whole expansion, this character, through the way that ArenaNet operates, gets barely any content. So now they're in a place where they have a cardboard cutout character. They have a character that's not deep. They have a character that's not interesting. They still want to make it clear that, you know, there's this diversity angle to it. So yeah, they end up shoehorning in this line, oh, I'm the agender engineer. They either intelligently or cynically, depending on your position, put it at the end of the meta, so it's repeating dialogue so that people get it every time at the end of the new Kaineng meta, and that's it. But what you have to understand is, Yao is not a shitty character because they decided their agenda, and that alone should be enough. It's a worthy substitute for a personality. I don't think they think that. Yao is a boring character because there's no content, because there's no time to get to know them. And if you look closely, this exact same thing is true for Marjorie and Casimir. You know, a lot of people have huge problems with Marjorie and Casimir. They have huge problems with the fact that the end of the story is, you know, this engagement scene and stuff. And they look at it as, oh, they've just been boiled down to the fact that they're a gay couple. First of all, I don't really think that's true. I think Marjorie has a lot of content about being a detective. She's not as interesting as she used to be when she was a bit more grim and it was more film noir. And Casimir's not as interesting as she used to be when she had the hiccup stuff and the collective and she was trying to become a lady again. These characters have been boiled away. But the fact is that they just don't get the airtime, the screen time for you to really get to know and care about them. Surprise, surprise, nearly all the characters, whether they're, air quotes, ticking a box or not, they're all shallow. They all have very little going on. I mean, look at what I was talking about a second ago with Chol Mu. People don't want to look at Chol Mu that deeply because Chol Mu isn't wandering around talking about how he's this minority or that. But Chol Mu is just as badly written. Chol Mu, it's just as much a surprise with someone in this video talking about how they're surprised that there was more to him than just being a thug or whatever. It's because we barely got any time with him. Same with Tetra Earthcool. If this was an Echo Vald Forest patch, we'd be in the same situation. And when we look at a character, say Minister Lee, right? They tried really hard at the end of Dragons to talk about how Lee was more than just being a fascist. He was more than just an isolationist or a xenophobe or whatever. But they have so little time. What can they realistically do? They have that sudden little comment about how, oh, Minister Lee licks dogs. About how he likes dogs. And in theory, that could round him out. But the truth is, it just feels like it sort of came out of nowhere and once again feels ham-fisted. I think that's the real issue here. To say that Guild Wars 2's story has got bad because they're just checking boxes or whatever doesn't really matter. Checking the box is easy. It's something you can do even with very, very minimal dialogue. The problem is we don't have enough content, and that leads me back to what I was saying at the start of this. This patch should have had scenes in Arborstone. It should have had scenes in Sidetongue and stuff. I think people need to be careful to not misidentify what the issues with this game are. And I think the especially shitty thing that's happening at the moment is when people get really personal about the writers and they say the new writers are hacks, the new writers are only interested in this one thing or that thing. But my stance on it is because it's the systems that are within the game and all the formats and ideas of what they think enough story is. You know, the new writers, should there be any, they didn't invent those systems. They didn't structure any of that stuff. They inherited it. I think if they're guilty of anything, it's probably they come in, they're really excited, wide-eyed, that they get to tell their story, they get to do their thing, without maybe realizing immediately just how limited they are. You know, I think if there's any one big fault I see with the writing, and this has been going on for years, like since Season 1, Season 2, it's a very difficult thing to wrestle with as a writer. It's that when you invent a character, when you design like a story idea, you personally, the person who made it, you fall in love with it. You understand all the ticks, all the pros and cons in your mind. A new character that you're about to introduce to the player base is really well rounded out and has all these dimensions. And it's very easy to forget like exactly what the audience knows about the character, which is much less. And they definitely won't love that character as much as you love that character, and they won't love this setting or this idea as much as the inventor. It's really easy to drift and forget that. Like if we look at Season 2, Belinda, you know, I look at that as a similar thing. The expectation is the audience is going to get really choked up and sad about it. But the reality is the audience in general isn't, because they haven't had the exposure and the time that the writers themselves have had. And I think that's been a consistent problem with Guild Wars 2. But the idea they're hacks just because they're interested in being political or saying their piece, it's nonsense, really. It's a galling take, and I don't think it's particularly based in reality. So anyway, that's a little of my take on it. I get such a headache reading most messages about it, because I think there's so many idiots out there and hateful people out there and disingenuous arguments being thrown around. If we want to be pragmatic and actually discuss why the Guild Wars 2 storytelling is weaker, maybe now than it could have been in years past, I think that's the more practical story here. There is another thing going on as well. To the Guild Wars 1ers out there, just like myself, you got to be a little bit careful with how good Guild Wars 1 was, because it wasn't actually that great. I think a lot of people need to remember that if you started playing this game as a teenager or even as a kid, if this was like one of your early MMO experiences, this was one of your formative experiences, kids are idiots. Teenagers are idiots. They have low standards and they don't really understand what quality is or not. So I think there's a lot of false memories going around, and this counts for all kinds of media and fandoms. So just try to keep that in mind when thinking about whether a standard you're looking for is an impossible standard or not. In some ways, Guild Wars 2 will never be as magical as Guild Wars 1 was because of that. I don't know, that comment I've just made there, though, is a bit reductive. Like, we should be able to critique, we should ask them to do better. There are obvious improvements they can make. But, you know, just try to bear that in mind. I don't like how people hold Guild Wars 1 up like it was the most ultimate thing ever. There's definitely things that it did really, really, really well, don't get me wrong. But always be cautious of that. But yeah, that's just another little thing to consider. So there you go, guys. Anyway, that's the video. Thank you very much. Obviously, I've ended the video with this last discussion, so expect the comments to be swarmed with this. But if you've got thoughts on anything, please feel free to let me know. I don't think I'm going to do a formal review of this patch. We get the picture. There's not even really much to review, and everything that I have to say about it, I think I've said now between this video and the previous live run-through. Any other thoughts you guys have, please do feel free to let me know. Thanks very much for watching. Keep an eye out for fans of the Tomb Raider playthrough. We'll be running back onto that very, very soon. And take care now, guys. Have a great day. See you soon.